All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive. Today, we're going headfirst into some seriously cutting-edge cybersecurity, folks. And it's a story that's fresh off the press. We're talking about this hacking group they call RomCom. And no, they're not sending out virtual roses or anything like that. We're talking zero-day exploits, international espionage, the whole 9 yards. And let me tell you, these guys, they're not messing around.
Yeah, it's interesting. You see these groups like RomCom, and sometimes they go by Tropical Scorpius or UNC 2596. They used to be all about the cybercrime side of things, like ransomware, stealing data, that kind of stuff. But now they've really shifted gears. They're all about espionage now,
I know.
especially going after governments and industries, big targets in Ukraine, Europe, and even here in the U.S.
It's a whole different ballgame now. We've been digging through some reports from GB hackers on security, and they've got all the details on RomCom's latest moves, and it's some pretty intense stuff. They've been hitting targets with not one, but TWO zero-day exploits, one in Mozilla Firefox and another in Windows. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with zero-day exploits, but just in case, for anyone new to this world, a zero-day exploit is basically a vulnerability that's so new, so fresh, the developers, they haven't even had time to patch it yet. It's like finding a secret backdoor into a system that no one else even knows exists. You know what I mean? And that's what makes them so dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. Zero-day exploits like these ones, CVE 249680 in Firefox and CDE 2024-49039 in Windows, these give hackers a way to just completely sidestep all the security measures that are in place. It's like, imagine you're finding and exploiting these flaws in software before anyone even knows they're there.
Yeah, it's like having a skeleton key that can open any door and no one knows you have it. So let's walk through this, all right? Imagine you're online, just doing your thing, maybe checking your email, reading some news articles, whatever. You click a link, it takes you to a website, looks totally normal, totally legitimate. But lurking beneath the surface, that's where RomCom has planted their little trap.
Exactly. And that's where things get really sneaky. This exploit, it's designed to trigger as soon as the web page loads. Bam. It injects malicious code into your system. And all this happens before you can even blink, before you even realize what's going on. And then, to cover their tracks, they redirect you to a safe, legitimate website. So you might not even know you've been hit.
It's like a digital Trojan horse, sneak in while you're not looking and then set up shop before you even know it's there. But the thing is, this isn't just about some random attacks, right? RomCom, they seem to be going after very specific targets.
Oh, yeah, you're right. They're not just casting a wide net hoping to catch whatever they can. I mean, look at their targets. Government entities in Ukraine and Europe. That's a big red flag. That screams espionage.
Yeah.
And then you see them hitting pharmaceutical and legal firms in the U.S. and Germany. That makes you think more about the financial motive, Maybe they're after intellectual property, trade secrets, things like that. And then back in Ukraine, they've hit the energy and defense sectors. Again, it's likely about espionage, trying to gain a strategic advantage. They're not just randomly attacking. They're picking their targets very carefully. It's a very organized and strategic operation.
Okay, so we've got sophisticated hackers using brand new exploits, 0 days, to target some very valuable organizations. Before we dive into how we can actually protect ourselves from this kind of stuff, I really want to understand the technical side a little better, how this all works. Can we break down what makes these exploits so effective? What's going on under the hood?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's start with the Firefox exploit, CVE 2024-9680. This one, it uses JavaScript to manipulate the browser's animation timeline feature, and it's targeting a specific type of bug called a use after free bug, which is actually a pretty common type of vulnerability. And this bug, it allows them to hijack the browser's JIT compiler. Now, the JIT compiler, that's responsible for executing code in the browser. So by taking control of it, they can basically force the browser to execute their own malicious code. That's how they get their foot in the door.
So they're essentially like reprogramming your browser to do whatever they want without you even knowing it's happening.
Exactly. And once they have control, they can download and execute RomCom's backdoor, which gives them a foothold in your system.
It's sneaky, I'll give them that. And what about the Windows exploit?
This one's really interesting. This is CDE 2024-49039. And this one leverages an undocumented RPC endpoint. It's like finding a secret communication channel within Windows itself. And they use this to escalate their privileges, which allows them to break out of the browser's sandbox. You see, the sandbox is designed to contain potentially harmful code, but by escaping it, they can execute code with the same level of access as the user who's logged in. So it's a very effective way to gain deeper access to the system.
So even if the browser tries to contain the threat, they've got a way to break out of jail and take over the whole system.
Exactly. And to make matters even worse, they then use a hidden PowerShell process to download even more malware. PowerShell, that's a powerful scripting tool that's built into Windows, so they can use it to do all sorts of damage once they've gained access.
Oh boy, this is not looking good. So we're talking about a multi-layered attack designed to bypass security measures, gain access to your system, and then install even more malware. And the scariest part is that these vulnerabilities were completely unknown until recently. I mean, it would have been almost impossible to defend against them.
That's the thing about zero days. They're incredibly dangerous because traditional security tools wouldn't have been able to detect or block them.
So what happened? Did anyone manage to stop this thing?
Thankfully, yes. Both Mozilla and Microsoft, they responded really quickly once they found out about these exploits. Mozilla actually patched the Firefox vulnerability in a record-breaking 25 hours. I mean, that's impressive, even by industry standards. And Microsoft wasn't far behind. They released a patch for the Windows vulnerability shortly after.
Okay, that's good news. It sounds like it's a constant race against time, right? Hackers finding new exploits, developers scrambling to patch them. But this must really highlight how important it is to keep your software up to date.
Absolutely. Those software updates, they might seem annoying sometimes, but they're often your first line of defense against threats like these.
So word to the wise, folks, keep those updates coming. You're listening to The Deep Dive, and we're breaking down all the latest stuff from those RomCom hackers. Patching, 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 you say. But what versions do we need to be running to be safe?
Right. Well, for Firefox, you got to make sure you're on at least version 131.0.2. Or if you're using Firefox ESR, then it's 128.3.1. And for Thunderbird, that's version 115.16 or later. Oh, and for Tor browser users out there, you'll need 13.5.7 or later. As for Windows, just make sure you've installed the November 2024 cumulative update. That's KB 5046.612.
Got it. All right, so consider that your cybersecurity PSA for the day. But patching, I mean, it's just one piece of the puzzle, right? What else can people do to protect themselves? Especially with these zero-day exploits, those are like the wild card, so hard to predict.
Well, one thing that often gets overlooked is understanding the motivations and the targets of these groups. Like with RomCom, we've seen them go after government entities, pharmaceutical companies, legal firms, even energy and defense sectors. So if you're in any of those fields, you really need to be extra careful.
Right, that makes sense. But even if you're not working in those specific sectors, these attacks just show that cyber threats, they can really affect anyone. So what can the average person do to stay safe?
One thing that can be really helpful is using endpoint detection and response solutions. They call them EDR for short. These are programs that just constantly monitor your computer, looking for any kind of suspicious activity. And they can block threats before they even have a chance to do any damage. It's like having a dedicated security guard just watching over your system 24/7.
That sounds pretty intense. But aren't those EDR solutions, aren't they usually expensive and kind of complicated to set up? I mean, are they really necessary for everyone?
That's a good question. Yeah, EDR solutions can be an investment, you're right. And they might be a bit overkill if you're just using your computer for basic stuff. But if you're dealing with sensitive data or if you're working in a high-risk environment, it's definitely worth thinking about.
Okay, so EDR is one option. What else is out there?
Another useful tool is sandboxing. Basically, what sandboxing does is it isolates any applications or files that seem risky. It puts them in a secure environment, so even if they contain malware, it can't spread to the rest of your system.
So it's like giving those shady files a little timeout, like, all right, you stay in here where you can't cause any trouble.
Exactly. It's all about containing the damage while you figure out what's going on.
Okay, so we've got patching, EDR, and sandboxing. Any other tips you can share?
Well, monitoring your network activity is really important too. You got to keep an eye out for any unusual outbound connections, especially to any IP addresses or domains that you don't recognize. That could be a sign that a backdoor has been installed and is trying to talk to the attacker server.
So it's like being aware of what's going on in your digital neighborhood.
Right.
See something suspicious, investigate further.
Exactly. And don't hesitate to reach out to a cybersecurity professional if you need help. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
All of this is really helpful, thanks. I think the big takeaway here is that cybersecurity isn't just about installing antivirus software and then forgetting about it. It's a process. You got to stay informed, update your defenses, and be ready to adapt to those new threats.
Couldn't agree more. As we saw with RomCom, even the most secure systems out there can be vulnerable. That's why it's so important to have a layered approach to security. Use a combination of different tools and techniques to create a strong defense.
So it's like building a fortress, and you need multiple layers of protection to make it really strong.
Ex-
So we've been talking about RomCom and they're pretty impressive exploits and what we can do to protect ourselves. But I think this whole situation really makes you wonder, like, how secure do you actually feel browsing the web right now? Does all this, hearing about these tactics and everything, does it make you rethink your own online habits at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question. I think it's important to remember that no system is ever truly 100% secure,
Hmm.
right? There are always going to be new threats popping up, new vulnerabilities being discovered. It's a cat and mouse game. So the key is to stay vigilant, to be aware of the risks, and to just take steps to minimize those risks as much as possible.
So it's not about living in fear, right? It's about being informed and being proactive. And honestly, I think that's a great note to end on. Cybersecurity, it's everyone's responsibility. It's not just on the tech companies or the government. It's about staying informed, sharing what we know, and working together to make the digital world a safer place for everyone.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Knowledge is power, and in the world of cybersecurity, it's our best defense.
That's so true. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of RomCom hackers. I hope you found it informative and maybe even a little empowering. Remember, folks, stay safe, stay curious, and keep diving deep.